Hello, everyone, and welcome to How Culture Drives Change at Vanquis Bank. Before we begin, just some housekeeping. If you do have any questions for our speakers this evening, please do fire them over via the chat box, and I'm sure they'll do their best to answer them at the end of the session. We are going to be recording the talk, and it will be shared by the Vanquis team after by email, along with further ways to stay connected. So today's session, we are hearing from not one, but two Marks who are joining us from Vanquis's engineering team, and they're going to be discussing the technology journey that Vanquis is on and how they are using culture to implement technical change. So without further ado, Mark and Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Del. Welcome everybody this evening. Thanks for joining. So let's get started. So we should probably do some introductions. Who we are and who Vanquis is. For you who don't know, Vanquis we're a bank, and we help people obtain credit and help them grow or maybe start their credit rating and their credit history. We do that via a number of different mechanisms. We provide credit cards, loans, and we also do some savings as well. Obviously, it doesn't necessarily help with your credit, but our target market is people that can't get credit through mainstream traditional banks for a whole variety of reasons. So we tend to try and help the underserved part of the market. We're part of a bigger group called Provident Financial. And so we have some sister companies that you may or may not have heard of, Moneybarn and Satsuma, that provide other types of credit and lending for customers who wish to purchase cars, unsecured loans, and so on. Obviously, I'm biased. I work for Vanquis, so I think we're brilliant. But don't take my word for it. Check us out on our Trustpilot. We're very proud of our score that we have on there, and we take that quite seriously with all of our customer feedback. And it's a great way to engage with our customer base. So check that out. We should probably say who the two Marks are. So over to you, Mark. Do you want to say?
So I'm Mark Grosser. So I'm a principal software engineer in the loans team. So we've been working mostly with the back end operation services, things like payments and reporting and that sort of thing.
Cool. I'm also Mark, and I've been at the bank 3.5 years. I currently work for the contact center team. So we are responsible for our agents and the tools and processes that they use. Been at the bank for 3 years. I've been exposed to a few different things. We've built a chatbot system to help our customers through a collections journey, which was a really interesting time to be a part of that. Done a lot around payments as well. So yeah, I've been exposed to quite a few different areas. Cool. Okay, so that's us. So we should probably move on to enough about us and the reason why everybody's here, and that's to talk about culture and technology and how we've tried to tackle those at Vanquis. So I think we should just quickly define what culture is. So according to the Oxford Dictionary, culture is the ideas, customs, and social behaviours of a particular people or society. So let's break that down and just briefly go into those areas. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because that would be probably a sociology lecture or an anthropology talk, and this is a tech talk. So I'm only going to briefly touch on some of this stuff, but it is quite important, I think, just to understand that it's very layered. There's not just one thing that defines your culture. It's made up of many different elements. Things you can, physical things you can touch, through to kind of conversations and stuff, through to much more abstract things as well. So they all have a part in defining what your culture is. Your company's history, the way they performed in the past, the kind of business that they've run, is a factor. You know, your company logos, your slogans, your mission statements, they tend to contribute. The way that people, the behaviours of your company, the rituals that they have. So things like maybe the way you're organised in a department level or even within a team level, and the way you go about your day-to-day routine at work. And also physical things, you know, like those tangible things. So buildings, you know, maybe not quite so much in the COVID era at the moment, but, you know, your equipment, even your quality of equipment, your tooling you use, the way the company share information with their employees through meetings, newsletters, emails, even things like uniforms. For example, if you worked at a fast food chain, you know, you'd be wearing a uniform, and that helps identify your company's culture. So there's many different ways to approach building culture. You can take for example, a top-down approach, which would be led by kind of your senior leaders, and they would talk to the company's reason for being, why you get up in the morning and go to work, you know, that mission statement, that value of why we're here. Some challenges, obviously, in everything. So that the challenge of that is to try to make that resonate with every person in your organisation, and to get that as a consistent message across everybody in different teams as they digest that for their own sphere. An alternative approach is bottom up, where you know, individuals or teams may try to promote good practice and their ways of working across the organisation. So it's more focused around those processes, practices, ways of working, rather than the kind of the mission statement and the value. Obviously, a challenge with that is trying to influence people, particularly outside of your own sphere, and working across the various different teams and departments within your organisation. And then, of course, there's always that blend and a bit of both. And so that blend of top down and bottom up. So everybody's great, everybody has a chance to contribute, and you can get a lot more buy-in from all the various different levels within your organisation. But it can assume that one size fits all, which may not be the case. So there's many different ways to tackle that. There's a lot of positive, regardless of approach, there's a lot of things that will positively influence the building of your culture. So it is important to have that sense of identity. What do we mean by that? Well, again, it comes back to that vision and the mission statement. It kind of defines your company, your organisation. It's probably unique to your organisation. And therefore that gives you a sense of identity, and it's really important because you get that unity within your organisation around why it is we're here and we're doing what we're doing, the services or the product or the solutions we're providing our customers. Shared sense of values, you know, they should be deeply held within all of us. You know, that shared sense of values will guide our behaviour and attitudes towards that company vision and how we achieve that through our day-to-day work. The norms and expectations. So these are kind of almost the unwritten rules. You know, how we interact with each other. You know, how we do our work. You know, they're so routine and so embedded that a lot of the time we're unaware of them. They're just there. They are just there. Lines of communication. So, you know, to have a real positive influence on culture, you probably need some open and transparent lines of communication within the team and outside of the team. And communication, you know, particularly again in this COVID area, takes many different forms, both verbal via via Zoom, via Teams, written via email, in the instant messaging chats that we may have, and so on. And having an open and transparent lines of communication creates a lot of mutual respect and trust, because things are very open. You know, you understand and you know, build that respect for each other. And another positive influence is continuous change. We all know the world changes. We work in technology. We're probably more aware of change than other areas. Therefore, we need to be responsive to change, and also a bit resilient to it as well, and understand that it will happen, and it doesn't rock the apple cart when it does happen. So yeah, that kind of is a multi-layered approach to culture, and some of the things that influence and change it. So that's great. Okay. So how do we look at that from a Vanquis perspective? So the first thing we decided to do was look at our individuals, our engineers and our team members, and kind of start with the individual. So we all know, you know, if you're happy and positive about work, you're more productive. That's an obvious statement, but there have been some scientists that have studied this in some detail, and according to these research papers, people are 13% more productive when they're comfortable and happy in their role. So we looked at that and was like, well, how can we make people more comfortable and happy? So, you know, there's many things that we looked at. One of them was for our engineers around individual choice over IDEs and tooling. So as individuals, we've all got our own preferences and ways of working. For example, you know, our themes and colours, most of, well, a bit presumptuous, but most of us I would expect on this call like quite a dark theme when it comes to our IDE. Some of us won't, some of us will prefer a bit of a lighter theme. I think the dark theme looks cool and geeky and Matrix-like, so, you know, I'm a big proponent of that one. You know, we like different fonts sizes, different colours, syntax highlighting and so on. We may like different plugins to you know, those power tools to enable us to do our work. And the other thing is, you know, we looked at our engineers and go, they sit in front of this IDE probably the majority of their work day. It's almost an extension of their arm. So we want to make it as comfortable, you know, and enable them to do their best, so they're not being frustrated when they come up to a particular problem or challenge that an IDE either presents itself or prevents them from doing. So how do we solve that? Well, we took the list to go, you know what, we looked at our approved software list and thought we can expand it. We can do better than this. We can give choice to our engineers. So it used to consist of Visual Studio, and that was pretty much it. So we looked at that and decided actually there's a lot of other tooling that is equally as good. And so we expanded that and added, as you can see, many different more IDEs and tooling to the list. And now as engineers, we now have a choice, and we can pick the IDE that we're most comfortable with, and that we think we're most productive with. 13% more productive, of course. Great IDEs are one thing. What else did we? Well, we looked at working hours. Again, you know, we're all individuals. We all have different commitments in and out of work. You know, I have 2 young children that take up a lot of my time. You know, I like to do the school run with them in the morning, so I'm not always at my desk at 9 o'clock. So as a team, we looked at that and said, okay, we'll have stand up at 9:30 because that can accommodate myself. So we're not precious on right, yeah, everybody has to be online at 9 or finishing at 5. You know, we try to just be flexible. I have a member of my team that starts very, very early in the morning. just because they're an early bird. That's how they work. So we try and accommodate that and try and plan any kind of team meetings around those other commitments. Cool. So that's the individuals. But we all know that there's no I in team, right? We're all part of a team. So the next step was to look at teams and how do we build good culture in teams. The team is always greater than the sum of its parts. There's a really great quote from quite a famous football player, Portuguese football player, who says, for him, the team always comes first. And without the help of his teammates or his colleagues, he's basically nothing. And I think that's quite a powerful statement when you break that down. And I think it applies to pretty much any team, in any environment, in any discipline. So I think that's a really powerful statement. So what do we do? So teams are very important. So what do we do about teams? Well, your team needs to be that safe space. You need to be, we talked briefly about trust earlier. You need to be able to trust your teammates. How do you get trust? Well, again, it comes back to being open and sharing and transparent. If you need to be able to open up and share and build that relationship. So it may be just a small little thing like I have 2 children, or it might be, outside of work, I love to run, as my colleagues know, and I run around in circles on the track. Or it might be I'm a petrol head, and whatever. Those little nuggets of information are the foundation and the bedrock of starting to build those relationships and getting to know somebody better. What else brings out that trust? Honesty. When you disagree or you don't like something, being able to be honest and have a healthy conversation around that is really important. What else makes a good team? We all talk about diverse teams. What does that mean again? Well, it comes in, again, it's layered. So from a talent perspective, good teams tend to have a good mix of different talents. We have maybe a senior and a junior engineers. We may have different disciplines within a team. If you're working to more of a Scrum team, you have your PO, you may have your Scrum Master. You've got this good diverse pool of talent. And hopefully you've got a good balance of perspectives. You've got people from different walks of life who've had different experiences that they can bring with them and help share those experiences with the team. The next, we could be here a long time. One of my favourite subjects. The next thing, a team really win or lose together. I think that's a really, really important statement to make. And it comes back to the no I in team. And without my colleagues, I am nothing. I think this is a really powerful statement. So there's no finger pointing or finger blaming. The team are collectively responsible. So they should collectively celebrate success and also collectively take it on the chin where you go, you know what, we've missed here or we failed here. That's a collective responsibility. Which means you've got that team ownership rather than individual ownership. And Mark's going to talk a little bit more about T-shaped engineers and what we mean by that in a few minutes. So what does a high-performing team look like? Well, the team are aligned and committed to the vision and goal of maybe the team and the company as well. We talked about the mission statements earlier. We all work together to achieve a common goal. You can't have people going off on a tangent and taking their own direction because you're not going to deliver in those scenarios. We should be innovating in our problem solving. So, finding new ways of solving problems, ways which are easier, quicker, more productive, add more value, and so on. And of course, we need to collaborate, which comes back to the communication and the opening and sharing this. And you also, the team need to reflect and constantly evolve and change. We've talked about resiliency, about continuous change. So how do you get resilient? You have a lot of reflection. So again, Scrum talks about sprint retros, which is one way of having that reflection time. But what else do we do? Well, we've said as a company, our teams, the individuals in the team, they have a 10% of their time is allocated to self-learning, self-development, and so on. That may be looking at new technologies, for example, on Pluralsight, or it might be I'm interested in creating some new code in a new language that I've never looked at before. So I'm creating a project on the side and exploring that. Again, and hopefully that will feed back for that kind of innovation that we talked about here. So that's kind of team and how we've looked at building culture in team and enabling teams. And then from a team, you get to a wider engineering area. And so how do you build good culture throughout your engineering department? Really interesting challenge. So at Vanquis, we're constantly evolving and trying new things. What we're currently doing, we have community of practices across some different disciplines. We've kind of collected ourselves as software, test and infrastructure community of practices, where we're trying to share, best practice, new technologies, new discoveries, or maybe I have a problem that I need to solve. I'd like some help from people, some ideas, some fresh perspectives. And we meet regularly. We meet twice a month, and we talk about lots and lots of different things. We have lunch and learn sessions. Mark, I know you've just recently run a TDD one, which is open to the whole bank. And Mark took us through, why should I even bother with TDD? What's it all about? Took us through some live coding, which I thought was very brave. It worked really well, but live coding sessions always scare the hell out of me. So good job there, Mark. And we covered lots of other things. Miro, data engineers have talked about how they can automatically generate test data and so on. We have Pluralsight licenses. That's an engineering thing across the board. Every engineer has a Pluralsight license they can use. Our senior leaders give us engineering updates where they can share a bit more strategically what's going on, where the vision is, how we're moving towards that vision. The various different work streams. We get a bit of insight into what's going on, slightly wider than the individual team or the hive that we're working within. It's a great way to recognise and call out some star teams and some good work that's going on. What else have we done? Common building blocks. This is something fairly new. So we're trying to look at how we can stop teams reinventing the wheel each time, and get a bit more sharing and consistency in the way that we tackle problems through code and through our solutions. So that's enough of me talking on about culture. This is a tech call, so I'm going to hand over to Mark to talk about, with that bedrock of culture, how we've now springboarded into the actual technical progress that we've made.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. So essentially, there's quite a big impact that culture can have on engineering, and that can affect how you choose the technologies, how you use them, how you work as a team. So I'll go through a little bit about how that's affected us at Vanquis. So first of all, I'll talk about where we were. So we weren't quite in the 1960s, but we do have we did have a lot of things that we've changed over the last few years. So first of all, we've got 3 locations which is an odd thing to say during COVID because there's actually hundreds of very small locations. So each team is about 4 developers, 2 testers, and 1 to 2 infrastructure engineers. So we've got many teams across those 3 locations. And what was happening was we're seeing a lot of differences between the teams. So you might have one team that's using Azure Kubernetes service. And in fact, we did have a team using that, but also using Terraform and Ansible. And that was quite interesting in that Ansible was actually being used to write Terraform. So Ansible was actually putting the configuration together. So essentially using one language to write another language, which is quite cool as a party trick, but it's a bit tricky for someone new in the team. So we had another team using Azure Functions, deployed this with Terraform. So that's Microsoft's serverless offering. Then we have loads of different asynchronous messaging solutions. So yeah, everything from service bus and service bus, storage queues, etc. For CI/CD as well. So also a range of tools. We've mostly settled on Azure DevOps apart from some of the legacy platforms. Yeah, again, we had some teams doing things manually, some teams doing it automated, some teams doing things somewhere between the two, in which case you had to know what was manual and what was automated in that team. Yeah, different entry points to APIs, different ways of securing the APIs with various different firewalls. And then even down to the branching strategy. So some teams are using Git flow, some are using abbreviated examples of it, some are using sort of complicated or customized Git flow. So there's a lot of differences between the teams. So what impact did this have? So each team, you needed to have very specific knowledge. So you might be able to work in one team just fine, but if you move to another team, then everything changes. So even like I was saying, the branching strategy, you'd want that to be pretty standard across teams. And so what this led to was it's very hard to move an engineer between teams, and hiring became more complicated as well. So we needed to know which team an engineer would be hired for. So if it was a team using Kubernetes, go ask loads of questions about Helm, Flux, Kubernetes, different network policies and that sort of thing. But if they're mostly Azure PaaS and we're using Terraform, we'd ask those Terraform questions. And then some teams are where you're still using, I think they're quite virtual machine heavy. So we'd be asking sort of more classic questions of Windows Server, Linux, and that sort of thing. So we found that, especially on the infrastructure side, engineers basically had to know everything if they were able to move between teams. And that's not really a very realistic thing. So essentially, engineers couldn't move between teams. We then had the concept of lots of duplication of effort. So teams would have the same problems, but they'll solve them in different ways. So the great example was we had a lot of debates around serverless versus Kubernetes. And actually some teams went with serverless, some with Kubernetes, and yeah, so there's a lot of duplication there. And then given that each team would have their own customized infrastructure, what that led to was each team now having to get their own security approvals. And I think that had its toll as well on the security teams, because one day they're talking AKS, the next day they're talking serverless, and the next day they're talking API management or something else, or even just virtual machines. So what's changed in software engineering since then? So on that side of things, so Mark has mentioned the communities of practice. So we have some fun technical discussions. We've talked about so many topics. I mean, some of them are microservices, and the age-old question of what is a microservice, and you could just talk about that for days. we're talking about backends for front ends. Where does it fit? Event-driven design, and then the complexities of that, such as how do you version events? Why would you want to version events? And because we're very much a microservice architecture, we're also talking about APIs a lot. So versioning as well, and how does that integrate with the pipeline? How do we discover these APIs? So those are some of the technical topics. And we also have the non-technical. So things like career progression. So where's the best way to, or how can you encourage an engineer to follow a certain path, or what options are there? Do we need an additional role somewhere to reduce the size of the step between two roles, between maybe a junior role and a senior role? Maybe we need something in between. And we've had a lot of fun with suggested questions for interviews. So we were trying to think of things that would be challenging, but not entirely terrifying. So I think we're somewhere in between, but we'll see how that goes. So another thing we have is, as Mark was saying, we've got the building blocks. So previously, each team had their own Azure Artifacts feed, which is sort of an internal NuGet feed or a package feed. And that meant that it was very hard to know what another team has built. So that because that knowledge isn't transferred between the teams, you'll find two teams building the same package or very similar packages. But now we've got a single engineering feed, so everyone can see what packages are there. And Azure Azure DevOps makes it nice and easy in that you can just search with keywords, and there's tagging abilities and that sort of thing. So we've got some packages to do with Dynamics 365. We've got a recent one to do with abstracting messaging. So this last one here, the Vanquis message bus package, it would essentially abstract away the underlying infrastructure. So essentially you just pull that package in and then create your message handlers, and you wouldn't really worry about, how is it working underneath the covers? Is it managed identity? Is it, what kind of connection string, or how is it managing the routing between the messages and the handlers? So that was all abstracted away, which saved time for people. So another thing is shared services. So we've got a number of third-party APIs that we connect to. They could be anything from actually setting up a loan to creating a credit card, or updating payments and that sort of thing. So what we're doing now is we're working on a way to discover these services. So we're adding those documentation artifacts to help people discover them. And that's going to save a lot of time for engineers, and to help with improving the velocity of delivering projects. And finally, we have some template .NET projects as well with the pipelines. So actually, just copying one of those templates means that you don't have to think about, okay, so I need this project to build, I need that one to test, and I need this one to deploy, and sort of doing all the gluing together of that pipeline. So what's changed in infrastructure engineering since then? So I think the driver for this was the weekly strategy sessions. So there was very much this renewed drive towards cloud and automation. But from that, there was the decision to go with a centralized Azure Kubernetes cluster to be shared across all the teams. So that would be, because it's just a single cluster, we decided it should be multi-region, and we wanted to make it really simple for engineers to use it. So rather than having to train everyone up on the intricacies of network policies, or how does Flux work and all these things, there was just a centralized repository of YAML Azure pipelines, and you could then pull that template and pass in the name of your service, and then some other parameters. It could be replicas or things like that. And it would just do all the hard work in the background, and you didn't have to worry about that level of detail. So that definitely made the barrier to entry a lot lower. Again, with Terraform, so not everyone in the team knows Terraform. So rather than having, let's say, every team create a module for service bus or to create one for a storage account, we had created a centralized module repository. So in that case, we've got standards where you can only create a storage account with particular TLS configurations or particular retention policies and that sort of thing. So not only did it reduce effort, but it also enabled a bit more standardization between the teams. Also, that things that came out of those discussions were the branching strategy and the pipelines. So thinking about, okay, which branch should be deployed to which environments, at what point do we merge with master, should we have a release branch, and that sort of thing. And then also that came with the centralized infrastructure was standardized ingress and egress. So what value did this all add? So, okay, we can now move engineers between teams. It's not a huge challenge anymore. And the teams now have common challenges. So you might have a team that was originally based in Bradford talking to a team in London. They may never have talked before, but they're talking about, how do we get the health probe working on this platform? And they're all using ASP.NET to do that. So it'll be quite easy for one team to help another out. So one thing I'd add is there's more collaboration across offices. So we don't really have any offices anymore. But instead of having 3 offices, we now have a few hundred offices. And actually that's helped us out a lot. So there is no concept of having to pick up the phone to talk to another office. You now have to pick up Teams to talk to anyone, even people you used to sit next to. So another thing that has added value is definitely the security approvals. So with there being just a single core platform with some bolt-ons around the side, that platform was already approved. So you could almost consider that, okay, I'm going to create an API, I'll put it in this platform. So the ingress and egress is already well documented, it's already been security approved. And you're now talking about sort of the bolt-ons, like I'm talking to a SQL server maybe it's on-premise, or maybe it's in another Azure subscription. So you're not talking about the whole entire platform. Another thing that we have benefited from greatly is being able to see the code of other teams. So previously you might have to request access to it, or ask for a quick meeting for someone to show you through the code. But I think this has been quite helpful. And then because we do have a common platform that we're using, there's a bit more centralized support. So actually, if your infrastructure engineers are off for a day or so, there's many other infrastructure engineers who can help you out, because they all know how that platform works. So it's not all rosy, but so we do have some challenges. So I think, given that we're going down very much the microservices approach, we're aiming for, if they're not microservices, they might be extremely small services, and a lot of reusability of code. So essentially what that leads to is absolutely tons of packages, loads of repos, and you've got the dependency challenges that go with that. And then there's loads of pipelines. So what we are trying to aim for is keeping things as standard as possible. So it's not too much work to maintain them. We also have some on-premise services. So those are some challenges that we have. If you've got a nice, highly available auto-scaling setup within Azure, and you want to load test that, but it's hitting one of your legacy SQL servers on premise, then that's something that we need to be aware of. That that is the point where things will fail, or it might be that it's just the latency of the connection. So we've got many teams in many offices. Sorry, in 3 offices when you eventually go back. So there's a lot of collaboration between the teams. You might find a few KT sessions, knowledge transfer sessions between the teams. So there's the balance of how much chatter is there between the teams versus how much can the teams work autonomously and have their heads down and get the code written and things. So, okay, this slide was good fun. So every time I had a few minutes, I did a few more things. And luckily the event was today, otherwise I would still be adding items to this list. So, okay, I mean, where do you see yourself? I mean, we've got so much going on. We've got NoSQL, we've got PowerShell, we've got, well, everyone has Git. We've got various different tools for CI/CD. We're using mostly Azure PaaS. Well, that is the aim. There's still a few Azure functions, although we're more driving towards Kubernetes currently. Yeah, we have a few virtual machines, lots of messaging technologies. We've got Service Bus there at the bottom. On the dev side, there's mostly on the dev side, there's mostly .NET. So, yeah. Okay, so on the infrastructure side, let's have a look at what sort of things you can expect to work with. So if you remember the other slide with all those different components, I've tried to keep this slide a little cleaner so don't blow minds. So we have this is an example of our pipeline. So we've got the application code. So we've got the .NET projects and solutions, and alongside we'll have the Helm charts and the Docker file. So that's the custom written items, and then you've got the template repositories. So we've got a number of different YAML templates that we use, and those would be just setting up, build and test, and also you've got the Flux part of the pipeline there. You've also got some Terraform modules which will be pulled into the pipeline. So in the actual repo for the service, there might not be that much Terraform. You might just be maybe just 100 lines, a few hundred lines of just calling modules and then passing in parameters. So after, during the build and release, there are a few artifacts produced. So we get a built container image that's pushed to the container registry, and a Flux config is sent to a Flux repo, which is then monitored by a Flux container, which is running on AKS. And that just basically looks at the configuration and sees, okay, so there's a new service here and it doesn't exist on Kubernetes. So what it will do is it will sort of make it so it will just take a look at the differences and just make it happen. So what's in Kubernetes matches the Flux config. So that's infrastructure engineering. Software engineering. So we have 25 teams. So that's a fair amount. We're definitely growing pretty fast. I'd say there's something for everyone. So most of the new systems are event-based. We're using asynchronous programming and trying to make sure there's reduced coupling between services, etc. We've been using .NET 5 for quite a while, actually waiting for .NET 6 to come out. So I'm pretty sure we won't take too long to move on to .NET 6, especially that .NET 6 is a long-term release and .NET 5 is current. So, okay, we've got lots of different database technologies, NoSQL and SQL, mostly Service Bus for messaging, some storage queues and others. Front end is usually Angular, and we're using Flutter for, I think, the new mobile app. And yeah, as I mentioned before, mostly microservices and distributed architectures. One interesting thing is the fact that we're a bank means, okay, we need to be relatively high security. So this adds a bit more of a challenge to things, because it's usually quite relatively straightforward to get something working, but to get it working at the max security settings is a whole new ballgame. So that makes for some, fun troubleshooting. And actually, I think we've had some interesting communities of practice discussions because, hey, we need it to be this secure. Yeah, so it adds a bit more, I wouldn't say fun, but yeah, it's definitely a bit more of a challenge. It will keep you amused for a bit. And then, yeah, of course, we're developing mostly on Kubernetes these days, and you can sort of get as involved as you want with Kubernetes. So there are some developers who are quite involved in those discussions and actually, troubleshooting containers, logging into pods, and checking things out at that level. Or if you prefer to stay more on the dev side, then that's also possible. Yeah. So definitely fast paced as well. It's just got so much happening at the moment. So yeah, that's it from us. So so thank you very much for attending. So if we can just pop back one slide. Thanks, Mark. So yeah, so I must urge you, so go take a look at our Vanquis Careers website. That's vanquiscareers.co.uk. So we've got lots of roles we're hiring for. I think we've got infrastructure engineers, principal infrastructure engineers, and then all levels of software engineering. Yeah, and there's many other roles. I think some data roles and other ones. So yeah, check it out.
Great, thank you both so much for that and for your insights. That was super insightful, and I think now will be a great opportunity to go for some questions. I know we've had a couple come through already, so if you want to take a moment, obviously from our audience, please do fire over any questions that you have in the chat box, and we'll get through them right now.
Cool. So let's have a look at some questions. Adele, shall I just take them off the top?
Yeah, take it away.
Cool. Okay. So first question is, what's next for Vanquis Engineering? Wow. Shall I take that one? What's next for Vanquis Engineering? Well, we've talked a lot. You've heard us talk a lot about software infrastructure, a bit about tests. We haven't talked that much about data. There is a lot of work going on in the background about looking currently where we are with data. Clearly, it's the bank, one of the bank's biggest assets, and so how do we maximize that asset? How do we gain most value out of our data around the way customers interact with our services, the way they manage their accounts, the trends and patterns that occur. So data is a big thing for us. How do we get access to it in as Mark said, but within a regulatory environment, with GDPR and PSI and all of these other compliance things. So how do we derive insight out of our data to inform us about what to do next? I think is probably a big and exciting challenge. That we talk about machine learning You know, how do we learn about that? And then maybe in the future after that, some kind of, how do we now have some AI over that machine learning? So definitely a big challenge, an exciting challenge for us next. Next question from Darren Briggs. Great story. How have you overcome common constraints in financial services like big data? There you go. Go on, Mark. I'll hand that one over to you.
Okay, sure. So we have, we have, how many million customers do you have? Like 2, or is it 3? Or we have quite a large number of customers, and they're all making payments all the time. We've got, you know, from the credit card platform. I mean, it could be something great if we could do some more analysis on that sort of data. But actually, we've got we have data from many different sources, and I think there are some work going on in the background. I'm not too close to it on how do we aggregate all this data into a common platform where we can now do interesting analytics over data we could never really connect before. So there's quite a lot of work happening in that space. We're using because of the scale of the data, we're definitely making use of Azure services, because essentially to have that sort of amount of data on premise, the amount of resources you need is quite colossal. But using the cloud quite cleverly in this way means that, first of all, we don't have to have that ultimate scale straight up. We can scale up as we go. So you're not paying for a huge set of racks and servers straight up. We're now just starting and working our way up. So we've got loads of performance that we can utilize within Azure. And also Azure makes things very simple to do quite complicated tasks. So there's things like the data factory and other large data or big data storage systems as well.
Cool. Next question, Terraform. Great question, Terraform from David Grain. Terraform's only recently moved to version 1. So it's on a pre-release, until then 0. Whatever. What were the engineering challenges of working with a beta release for the last couple of years? The short answer to that question is many. There are many challenges we faced. It being a beta, there have been some breaking changes, moving from, say, .12 to .13, which has meant some problems that we've had with our state files and so on, which has caused us some pain. There's a lot of things that are not supported via Terraform, even in version 1. Most recently, we've been looking at Azure app configuration and feature toggling. And there's only a certain amount of support Terraform give currently to that. So we've had to be innovative in the way that we approach those problems and work around those. Sometimes that's involved using Terraform in combination with something else like the Azure CLI, or just taking a completely different approach. So it's certainly not for everybody. It's quite a bold move, but I think it's paying off quite well for us. Next question, Neil asks, are you looking at migrating from Azure DevOps to GitHub Actions at some point? Go on, Mark.
Yeah, should I take that? Okay,
yep.
So GitHub Actions. So we haven't discussed that level of migration yet, but I think definitely one thing that we do have is we're quite agile for being a bank. I mean, we're not the biggest bank, but that gives us that advantage of being more agile. So it could be something we trial at some time, but I don't think we have any plans just yet. So I mean, we would just have to look at how does Azure DevOps compared to GitHub Actions. I think one of the nice things I probably need to check if it is in GitHub Actions is that with Azure DevOps we have a single pane of glass, so we can click on a task, look at the pull request, from there see the commits, and then we could follow that through to the pipeline and see the release and then who approved it. So I mean that's a nice thing that we definitely make use of a lot in Azure DevOps. But yeah, so I think I mean it's something that I might definitely check out a bit more and see what if anything that we can recommend. But yeah, so we're quite open to suggestions like this.
Cool. Another question from Darren. How have you overcome integration with on-prem or legacy or SaaS platforms and services? Mark, I'm going to throw that one to you again, because I know in your space, you've got a lot of moving different parts with kind of legacy and new tech. So. Yeah,
so okay, so integration with almost external systems on premise or other, especially SaaS. So they all have their own set of challenges. So I mean, with on premise, you think of how much traffic are you allowing between Azure and on premise? What firewalls are you going through? The most challenging sort of issues are if there's an intermittent network issue and you've got maybe a pod running on Kubernetes in Azure, and then your data center, something is happening between the two. So the number of teams you need to get involved to troubleshoot that makes things quite challenging. So I mean, what we've got is we've got quite good knowledge across the teams. So, for example, as some principal software engineers would, or even some software engineers would know about what firewalls are between these services, so they can they have the almost end-to-end view. They know everything from pods almost to server in the data center. So those sort of individuals are very, very useful in this sort of situation. So I think breaking down silos definitely does help here. So the more that knowledge is shared, the less sort of throwing issues over the fence, should I say, the less that happens. So yeah, I think with SaaS platforms as well, that's quite interesting, in that usually they're not IP restricted. So like if we're connecting to something like Dynamics or writing some integration with Office 365, if those services need to call our services, we would essentially need to treat that as an internet connection, so a connection over the public internet, and then we'd have to secure that accordingly.
Yeah, I'd second that, and just add that those integration problems are be bold, be brave, trust in your team, strive for that excellence, and you'll find innovative ways to tackle those problems. You may get cut, or you might bleed. You might be at bleeding edge, and therefore you get cut slightly sometimes. But if you learn quickly and iterate, then you can make a very potentially from the outside a bad situation actually turn out to be something much better than you ever expected. So yeah, be bold and trust in your team to solutionize. Cool. Next one from Phil. You spoke about bottom up, top down, and blended / hybrid models. I did. Does a blended model allow true autonomy of teams, or would you consider this directed autonomy? And he also asked, by extension, how does autonomy fit into a highly regulated environment? Does a blended model allow for true autonomy? I believe so. I think all approaches allow autonomy. Talking to the blended approach, there's within a team you have various stakeholders. That blended approach means that the stakeholders have a seat at the table, and then they are another by extension, they are another team member. So that autonomy comes from that team environment, and open and transparent lines of communication, trust, mutual respect, and so on. So I believe that a blended approach does allow that, as does a top-down and a bottom-up. And how does autonomy fit into a highly regulated environment? Well, the regulators set the guidelines and the boundaries. That's quite clear as to they define the box really to work in. So you've clearly got autonomy within that box. You don't have autonomy outside the box because you won't satisfy the regulators and you won't be in business if you stray outside that box. So I think that works well. Sometimes it's good to have some clear guidelines to work within. It means you have to make less decisions sometimes. Sometimes it adds more decisions. Sometimes it takes some of those decisions away for you. Michael asked, how do you pronounce Azure? Azure, right? I don't know.
Well, I say Azure.
Azure, yeah. Maybe we'll have a poll on that question.
Oh, yeah, it'd be a good poll.
We can vote on that. Tomato, tomato, potato, potato.
I'd like to know how we write that poll out, because it's how do you pronounce A-Z-U-R-E? Is it A-Z-U-R-E or A-Z-U-R-E? Yeah. No, I actually, why don't we can go look at maybe how the guys who created it say it, because I think I say it with an American accent for some reason. We'll talk to you later about that one, Mike. Yeah.
I know my son Isaac pronounces zebra, much to my disgust. Yeah. I think. Are there any more questions?
There's a great comment from Darren actually. So he's saying it's not quite a question, but it's sounds like it's a fantastic place to work in, from graduates to individuals that want an environment that inspires creativity and fosters innovation. So yeah, I definitely second that. So so one thing that we have is the roles aren't 100% clear cut. So if you get into infrastructure and you quite like the .NET side and you just want to do more and more coding, so there is the opportunity to pick up some development work. Obviously your code will be approved by one of the software engineers, and we have that sort of culture where if you don't entirely know what you're doing, someone will help you out, and then you learn from the other people on the team. But also we've got loads of training tools. Pluralsight is one of the tools that we provide for all the engineers, and that's an unlimited license as far as I know for watching as much Pluralsight as you want in a month. Yeah, so definitely I definitely second this. And also in terms of innovation and creativity, so what we're striving to give engineers is about 10% time to to learn new things during working hours. So it could be something that it's one of those annoying little tasks that you want to automate and never found time to do it. Or it could be, hey, you want to learn something like extreme high performance programming that you may not know so much about, or you want to try something out with maybe try Pulumi or Azure Bicep or some other technology that we don't use. Yeah, so definitely, it's definitely very encouraged.
Great. Well, I think that is all that we have time for this evening. Thank you so much once again to both Marks for sharing your journey with us. Obviously, if you do have any further questions, we will be continuing the conversation on the Vanquis LinkedIn event chat page. So please feel free to head over to there, or you can message our speakers both directly on LinkedIn. We are recording the session, as you know, so this will be sent over by email tomorrow. And to stay up to date with the latest news and opportunities with Vanquis, do connect across their social channels. And if you are looking for that new opportunity, don't forget to check out the Vanquis careers page. Great. Well, thank you both and have a lovely evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.